Picture this: a lone wooden ship cutting through towering waves, its crew staring at an endless horizon with no land in sight. No satellites, no compasses, just the wind, the water, and an unshakable will to push beyond the known world. This wasn't just a voyage, it was a leap of faith into the abyss. For centuries, legendary seafarers faced this very reality, venturing into uncharted waters with nothing but their wits and the stars above. How did they do it? How did they cross thousands of miles of open ocean, finding tiny islands in a vast blue desert, or navigating through storms that would make even modern sailors hesitate? The answer lies in a blend of courage, ingenuity, and secrets passed down through generations. Secrets we're about to uncover together. These explorers weren't just sailors, they were pioneers of the impossible. Think of the Polynesians, who read the ocean like a book, tracking the flight patterns of birds, the swirl of currents, even the slightest shifts in wave patterns to guide their way. Or the Vikings, whose sleek longships sliced through icy northern seas, their navigators using sunstones to pinpoint the sun on cloudy days. These weren't just tricks of the trade, they were lifelines honed over centuries of trial and error, often paid for in lives lost to the sea's merciless whims. Yet, despite the risks, they kept sailing, driven by something deeper than curiosity, a hunger to discover what lay beyond the edge of the map. What's truly astonishing isn't just that they survived, it's that they thrived, weaving a web of trade, culture, and connection across oceans that once seemed impassable. Their journeys reshaped the world, bringing distant civilizations into contact for the first time. And here's the wildest part: many of their techniques are still used today, a testament to their brilliance. So, if you've ever wondered how humanity first conquered the seas, or what it took to stand on the deck of a ship and sail into the unknown, you're about to step into their world. This is the story of how legendary seafarers crossed unknown waters, and how their legacy still echoes in every wave that crashes against the shore. Long before GPS satellites or digital maps, the greatest seafaring civilizations of history were already rewriting the rules of human possibility. Take the Phoenicians. These master shipbuilders of the ancient Mediterranean didn't just hug the coastline. They sailed straight into the Atlantic's treacherous waters as early as 2,000 years before the Common Era, establishing trade routes that stretched from modern-day Lebanon all the way to Britain. Their secret, an intimate knowledge of seasonal winds and currents, passed down through generations of sailors who treated the sea like an extension of their homeland. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the Chinese Ming dynasty was launching treasure ships so massive they dwarfed European vessels by centuries, some stretching over 400 feet long with 9 masts, carrying not just silk and porcelain but entire diplomatic missions to distant shores. What fueled these daring voyages wasn't just wanderlust, it was a perfect storm of ambition and necessity. Spices from the Moluccas could make a merchant rich beyond imagination in Renaissance Venice. The promise of gold drove Spanish galleons across the Atlantic, while the search for new fishing grounds propelled Norse settlers to risk icy voyages to Newfoundland. But here's what's easy to overlook. Every one of these journeys began with someone staring at the horizon and wondering, what if? That spark of curiosity had to overcome very real fears. Sailors of the time whispered of sea monsters lurking beyond charted waters, of ships sailing off the edge of a flat earth. Yet still they went, trading the safety of shore for the intoxicating promise of the unknown. This hunger to explore created an arms race of maritime innovation. Arab traders perfected the astrolabe to measure star positions, while Pacific Islanders memorized wave patterns that could lead them to specks of land thousands of miles apart. European navigators pored over portolan charts, intricate maps drawn on animal hides that recorded coastal details with astonishing precision. Each civilization developed its own toolkit for survival at sea, but they all shared one crucial asset: the ability to read nature's subtle signs. A sudden change in water color might reveal shallow reefs ahead. Certain cloud formations could hint at land beyond the curvature of the earth. These weren't just skills, they were lifelines forged through generations of hard-won experience. Yet, even with all this knowledge, the ocean remained an unforgiving teacher. A single miscalculation could mean missing a vital island by mere miles, a death sentence in an era when carrying extra food and water meant sacrificing precious cargo space. That's why the next breakthrough changed everything: the art of celestial navigation. By learning to converse with the stars themselves, sailors finally had a reliable way to measure their position on the featureless blue expanse. But that's a story for the next chapter, one that begins with a simple question: how do you navigate when there's nothing but sky and water in every direction? To navigate the open ocean without landmarks required more than just courage. It demanded an intimate conversation with the night sky. Imagine crouching on the deck of a Polynesian outrigger canoe, watching as the star named Hokupa, what we call Polaris, the North Star, held its fixed position in the heavens while other stars wheeled around it. For Pacific Islanders, this wasn't just a light in the darkness, it was the anchor of their entire navigational system. They memorized the rising and setting points of over 200 stars, creating mental star compasses where each celestial body acted as a directional marker. When clouds obscured the sky, they'd rely on the faint glow of starlight reflecting off distant waves, a technique called star pathing that allowed them to stay on course even when the stars themselves were invisible. But the Polynesians weren't alone in their celestial mastery. Arab traders navigating the Indian Ocean carried a deceptively simple tool: the camel, a small wooden rectangle with a knotted string. By holding it at arm's length and aligning the top edge with a known star like Polaris while the bottom grazed the horizon, they could measure their latitude with startling accuracy. Each knot on the string corresponded to a specific trading port, turning astronomy into a practical roadmap across open water. Meanwhile, Norse sailors facing the overcast skies of the North Atlantic relied on sunstones, crystals of calcite or cordierite that polarized sunlight, revealing the sun's position even through dense fog or cloud cover. These weren't just tools, they were survival technologies born from generations of observing how light interacts with the atmosphere. The real breakthrough came when navigators realized the heavens weren't static, they shifted with the seasons. The Egyptians noticed that Sirius, the brightest star, rose just before dawn during the Nile's annual flood, turning astronomy into a calendar. Mediterranean sailors watched as the constellation Orion climbed higher in the winter sky, signaling the best time to stow their ships before storms arrived. This fusion of timekeeping and navigation reached its peak with the cross staff and later the sextant, allowing sailors to measure the angle between a star and the horizon with precision. But here's what's astonishing: many of these techniques required no tools at all. Skilled navigators could determine latitude just by stretching out their hand-counting finger widths between the horizon and a guiding star, with each width representing roughly 1 degree of celestial arc. Yet celestial navigation had its limits. Near the equator, where Polaris dips below the horizon, sailors had to pivot to other markers like the Southern Cross. In the monsoon belts of Southeast Asia, where seasonal rains obscured the sky for months, they developed alternative methods using swell patterns and migratory birds. And everywhere, the moon played its part. Its phases not only tracked time but also influenced tides, creating navigational rhythms that dictated when to enter treacherous harbors or skirt shallow reefs. This wasn't just science, it was a dialogue with the cosmos, where every shimmering point of light told part of a story written across the sky. The sun, of course, held its own secrets. While stars guided the night, the sun's daily arc became the clockwork of daytime navigation. But that's where our voyage turns next, to the golden disk that ruled the day, and the ingenious ways sailors learned to harness its light for journeys beyond the edge of the known world. The blazing sun was more than just a source of light. It was the ancient sailor's most faithful guide. Each dawn, as its golden edge broke the horizon, it marked not only the start of a new day, but the beginning of a carefully orchestrated dance between mariners and the heavens. Polynesian navigators, for instance, would memorize exact points on the shoreline where the sun rose during solstices and equinoxes, creating a mental calendar etched into the landscape itself. They noticed how the sun's path shifted slightly north or south with the seasons, and by tracking these subtle movements, they could predict currents, winds, and even the best times to plant crops on newly discovered islands. This wasn't just observation, it was a profound synchronization with nature's rhythms. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, sailors developed tools to harness the sun's power with mathematical precision. The astrolabe, a brass disc etched with star maps and angular scales, allowed them to measure the sun's height at noon by aligning its shadow with marked notches. A simple calculation comparing that angle to known values from home ports revealed how far north or south they'd traveled. The quadrant refined this further, using a weighted plumb line to gauge the sun's elevation against a graduated arc. But here's what's remarkable. These weren't just instruments for elites. Ordinary crew members learned to use simplified versions, like the cross staff, a wooden beam with a sliding crosspiece that cast shadows correlating to latitude. Knowledge wasn't hoarded, it was shared as a matter of survival. Yet the sun posed puzzles. Near the equator, its near vertical noon position made measurements tricky, while in polar regions, its low arc created weeks of endless daylight. Norse navigators facing the midnight sun developed clever workarounds. They'd note how the sun's glare reflected off icebergs at specific angles, or how certain algae blooms only appeared when the water reached particular temperatures warmed by prolonged sunlight. Arabian traders crossing the Indian Ocean timed their voyages with the seasonal monsoons, which they predicted by observing how the sun's intensity affected cloud formations months in advance. Every challenge spawned innovation, but what happened when clouds swallowed the sun whole? That's when sailors turned to nature's subtle backup systems. Portuguese explorers noticed that migrating whales followed specific routes tied to underwater topography, paths that often led to sheltered bays. The color and temperature of ocean currents became living maps. The Gulf Stream's dark blue warmth, for instance, served as a liquid highway for ships returning from the Caribbean to Europe. Even the behavior of seabirds offered clues. Shearwaters flying in tight circles might indicate nearby land, while their straight flight patterns signaled open ocean. These weren't fallback methods, they were parallel sciences, equally sophisticated in their own right. The true mastery of ancient navigation lay in this interplay of tools and intuition. A skilled navigator could switch seamlessly from measuring sun angles with brass instruments to reading the language of bioluminescent plankton sparkling in a ship's wake. Each sparkled brighter in warmer waters, hinting at favorable currents. They understood that the sun didn't work alone. It was part of an intricate web of signs, all whispering the same essential truth, the way forward. And as twilight faded these solar secrets into darkness, another guide would take its place. The moon, with its own set of navigational gifts, waiting to steer ships through the silver-lit night. When clouds blanketed the stars and fog swallowed the sun, ancient mariners didn't panic. They turned to the ocean itself, learning to decipher its subtle language. Polynesian wayfinders could detect an island long before it appeared on the horizon simply by feeling the way waves rebounded off distant shores. They recognized distinct patterns, swells that curved around landmasses or sudden ripples caused by underwater reefs, each distortion a breadcrumb leading toward safety. Some navigators even lay in their canoes, eyes closed, reading these vibrations through their bodies like a musician tuning an instrument. The ocean wasn't just an obstacle, it was a living map, pulsing with information for those who knew how to listen. Birds became another lifeline. An albatross circling lazily might signal open water, while frantic terns darting in straight lines often betrayed land just over the horizon. Pacific Islanders memorized the flight ranges of different species. A noddy tern's maximum reach of about 40 miles, for instance, meant that spotting one at dusk guaranteed an island within a day's sail. Even the absence of birds held meaning. Migratory species vanishing from the skies hinted at seasonal shifts, warning sailors to adjust their routes before storms arrived. These weren't just chance observations, they were data points in a sophisticated survival algorithm refined over centuries. Then there were the clouds, those fleeting shapeshifters that often revealed what the eye couldn't yet see. A stationary cumulus cloud in an otherwise empty sky might hover above an island's warm landmass, its roots hidden by the curvature of the Earth. Navigators in the Marshall Islands even developed stick charts, not to plot islands directly, but to map how ocean swells bent around them, using curved palm ribs and cowrie shells to represent wave interference patterns. The charts looked like abstract art to outsiders, but to initiates they were blueprints of the sea's hidden architecture. Watercolor told its own story. The deep indigo of open ocean gave way to turquoise near coral atolls, while sudden patches of brown warned of silt from river mouths miles away. Portuguese explorers noted how the Gulf Stream's dark hue contrasted with the lighter coastal waters, turning currents into visible highways. Even bioluminescence played its part, certain plankton species glowing brighter in warmer waters, creating shimmering trails that mirrored favorable currents. Every element of nature collaborated in this silent dialogue, offering clues to those patient enough to interpret them. This knowledge wasn't written in books, it was woven into chants, dances, and stories, passed down through generations like a sacred trust. A master navigator's training might take decades as they internalized hundreds of environmental cues until reading them became second nature. The true marvel isn't that they crossed vast distances, it's that they did so by forging an unbreakable partnership with the natural world, turning whispers of wind and wave into a roadmap across the unknown. And just as they relied on these invisible forces, the next chapter of their journey would harness the most powerful ally of all, the wind itself, sculpting their path like an unseen hand guiding them onward. The wind wasn't just a force of nature, it was an ancient mariner's most powerful ally. Picture the Phoenician trading ships, their square sails billowing as they caught the steady northwesterly winds of the Mediterranean, known today as the Artesian winds. These seasonal breezes blew like clockwork each summer, creating a natural highway between Egypt and the Aegean. The sailors didn't fight the wind, they danced with it, timing their voyages so the return trip would coincide with shifting autumn winds that carried them home. This wasn't luck, it was a meticulous understanding of atmospheric rhythms, passed down through generations like a sacred trust. But the true masters of wind reading were the Austronesian peoples, whose double-hulled voyaging canoes harnessed the monsoon system like no other. Each year, they'd ride the southwest monsoon's moist gusts to cross the Indian Ocean toward Africa, then catch the reverse northeast winds months later to return. These weren't just trips, they were precision maneuvers planned around nature's own calendar. The secret lay in reading the wind's subtle cues. A shift in humidity might signal the monsoon's impending arrival, while certain cloud formations hinted at stable trade winds perfect for open ocean crossings. Then there were the currents, nature's hidden conveyor belts. The Canary Current swept ships south along Africa's west coast, while the North Atlantic Drift carried Norse explorers toward Greenland's icy shores. Pacific navigators memorized how the equatorial countercurrent could push a vessel off course by hundreds of miles if unaccounted for. Some currents even had distinct personalities. The Kuroshio Current near Japan flowed so powerfully that Chinese records called it the Black Tide, its dark, warm waters standing out against colder seas. Sailors learned to measure current strength by tossing coconuts overboard and counting how quickly they disappeared astern, a primitive but effective speed log. Not all winds were friendly, of course. The dreaded doldrums near the equator could trap ships for weeks in windless purgatory, their crews slowly succumbing to thirst. That's why Polynesian navigators carried preserved foods like fermented breadfruit, while Arab dhows stored extra water in porous clay jars that kept it cool through evaporation. And then there were the roaring 40s, the relentless westerlies of the southern hemisphere that could either catapult a ship around Cape Horn or dash it against Antarctic icebergs. Navigating these extremes required more than skill. It demanded vessels engineered for the challenge, which brings us to the unsung heroes of maritime history, the shipwrights. The Vikings' longships, with their shallow drafts and flexible oak hulls, could ride up onto beaches or glide through icy fjords. Chinese junks featured watertight bulk compartments centuries before Europe adopted the design, while Arabian dhows used stitched plank construction that flexed with storm waves rather than fighting them. Each innovation wasn't just about speed or cargo capacity. It was about surviving the invisible forces that ruled the oceans. The right hull shape could mean the difference between slicing effortlessly through a current or being dragged helplessly off course. What's astonishing isn't that these cultures mastered their local waters, it's how far beyond them they ventured. Polynesians reading Pacific swell patterns could detect islands long before land appeared, while Norse explorers interpreting water temperature and bird migrations pushed into the North Atlantic's frozen reaches. This was navigation as high art, blending meteorology, oceanography, and sheer intuition into something approaching magic. Yet for all their brilliance, one question remained: how did they document these discoveries for others to follow? The answer lies not in maps as we know them, but in songs, stick charts, and stories that turned collective memory into a living atlas. The difference between floating and conquering the seas often came down to a few ingenious design choices. Take the Viking longships, those sleek, serpentine vessels that could glide through shallow rivers just as effortlessly as they plowed through North Atlantic swells. Their secret, a radical combination of flexibility and strength. Clinker built with overlapping oak planks riveted together, these hulls could bend with storm waves rather than resist them, while their shallow drafts allowed raids on unsuspecting coastal villages where deeper ships couldn't follow. But speed was their true superpower. A single square sail woven from heavy wool caught the wind like a dragon's wing, while oarsmen could propel the ship at nearly 15 knots when silence or sudden bursts of speed were needed. This wasn't just transportation, it was a predator honed by centuries of Nordic shipwrights perfecting their craft. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Chinese junks were rewriting the rules of maritime engineering. Their most revolutionary feature, watertight bulkheads, divided the hull into separate compartments, so a breach in one section wouldn't doom the entire ship. Imagine the awe of European traders watching as these massive vessels, some over 400 feet long, weathered storms that would splinter their own ships to kindling. Junks also boasted balanced lug sails stiffened with bamboo battens, a design so efficient it could harness wind from any direction, eliminating the need to constantly adjust rigging. And let's not forget the stern-mounted rudder, a Chinese innovation that gave unprecedented control compared to the side-mounted steering oars still used in the Mediterranean. These weren't just boats, they were floating fortresses of ingenuity. But perhaps no vessel embodied the marriage of simplicity and sophistication like the Polynesian double-hulled canoe. By lashing two narrow hulls together with a woven platform in between, these craft achieved something remarkable: the stability of a wide ship without sacrificing speed. The genius lay in the outrigger, a single lateral float that acted like a training wheel for the ocean, preventing capsizes in raging swells. Their sails, often triangular and made from pandanus leaves, could pivot instantly to catch shifting winds, crucial for navigating the Pacific's unpredictable squalls. And here's what's extraordinary. These canoes weren't just built, they were grown. Shipwrights would train trees into curved shapes over decades, harvesting them only when the wood had naturally formed the perfect hull contours. This was shipbuilding as a dialogue with nature, where patience yielded perfection. Life aboard these vessels was a masterclass in resourcefulness. On month-long Pacific crossings, Polynesian navigators carried seedlings and saplings to plant on new islands, a floating nursery that ensured survival beyond the voyage. Viking crews slept under woolen blankets on deck, their personal sea chests doubling as rowing benches by day. Chinese treasure ships featured floating gardens in ceramic pots, providing fresh greens to fend off scurvy long before Europeans understood the disease. Every culture developed its own rhythms. Arab-D, how crews timed prayers by the sun's position, while Norse sailors used Nars, sturdy cargo ships to transport livestock in pens below deck, their lowing mixing with the creak of ropes and the slap of waves. The true test of these ships came in extreme conditions. When a typhoon struck, junk crews could drop giant bamboo anchors to ride out the storm, their multiple masts designed to collapse strategically if winds grew too fierce. Viking longships, though less stable in heavy seas, could be beached instantly, a lifesaver when ice floes suddenly clogged northern waters, and those Polynesian outriggers. Their lightness became an asset in coral reefs, where crews could lift the entire vessel to safety at low tide. Each design solved problems we'd consider insurmountable today without computers, without blueprints, just generations of hard-earned wisdom carved into wood and woven into sails. What united them all was this: a profound respect for the sea's power and the humility to learn from it rather than dominate it. Yet these ships were more than tools, they were time machines. The moment a sailor stepped aboard, they entered a self-contained world with its own rules, hierarchies, and survival strategies. From the captain who read the waves like poetry to the cook who turned salted fish into meals that sustained morale, every role was vital. And that's where our voyage turns next, to the human stories etched into these wooden decks, where courage and camaraderie met the ocean's endless challenge. Life aboard an ancient sailing vessel was a relentless test of endurance where survival hinged on meticulous routines and hard-won wisdom. Imagine the stench of damp wood and salt-crusted ropes, the groan of timbers flexing against endless waves, and the ever-present worry of dwindling supplies. A single voyage could stretch across seasons, turning food preservation into a high-stakes science. Scandinavian sailors baked rock-hard flatbread called hardtack, flour, water, and salt dried to near indestructibility. It could last years if kept dry, though chewing it often required soaking in brine or beer to avoid shattered teeth. Pacific Islanders took a different approach, fermenting breadfruit in leaf-lined pits to create sour, dough-like ma that stayed edible for months. Every culture developed its own solutions. Chinese junks carried live fish in onboard tanks, Arab dhows stocked dates rich in calories and potassium, and Viking Nars hung smoked herring in the rigging to cure in the North Sea wind. Fresh water was even more precious than food. A single leaky barrel could doom a crew to dehydration's slow agony. Polynesian navigators stretched their supply by drinking coconut water and collecting rain in sails funneled into hollowed-out logs. Mediterranean ships sometimes carried porous clay amphorae, the evaporation cooling the water inside, a primitive but effective refrigeration. But desperation bred innovation too. Sailors learned to skim freshwater lenses floating atop saltwater near estuaries, or to extract moisture from fish spines when no other options remained. Portuguese even devised solar stills using tarred cloth to condense seawater vapor, a technique still taught in survival manuals today. Disease lurked in every corner of a ship's cramped quarters. Scurvy's bleeding gums and lethargy could decimate crews until Asian traders taught Europeans the value of citrus and pickled vegetables. Dysentery spread like wildfire through contaminated water, while fungal infections festered in perpetually damp clothing. Sailors countered these threats with surprising sophistication. Ming Dynasty ships burned aromatic herbs to purify air, while Polynesian healers administered fermented seaweed rich in vitamins. Viking longships mandated strict hygiene combs carved from antler reveal meticulous grooming, and saga accounts describe weekly laundry days where woolens were boiled in seawater to kill lice. Yet the greatest challenge wasn't physical, it was psychological. Isolation in a featureless seascape could unravel even seasoned sailors. Polynesian navigators fought despair by chanting genealogies that connected them to ancestors who'd braved these same waters. European crews clung to rituals, crossing the line, ceremonies for passing the equator, or whistling to summon wind during doldrums, a practice some captains banned, fearing it might instead summon storms. Superstitions thrived in this liminal space. Tattoos of pigs and roosters believed to protect against drowning, avoidance of red-haired passengers omen of bad luck, or the sacred taboo systems that guided Pacific voyages, dictating everything from meal timing to sexual abstinence. Leadership meant balancing discipline with compassion. A Chinese treasure ship's captain might consult astrologers to maintain morale, while a Viking skipper knew when to distribute extra ale to stiffen resolve. Mutiny was a constant threat. Magellan's crew nearly rebelled over worm-infested biscuits, so wise leaders kept hands busy with tasks like rope mending or storytelling contests. The bonds formed in these floating microcosms were intense. Norse sagas tell of oarsmen who vowed to sail together into the afterlife, while Polynesian crews often intermarried with villages they traded with, weaving kinship networks across the Pacific. What emerges from these fragments isn't just a survival manual, it's a portrait of humanity at its most resilient. Every meal scraped from the sea, every sip of freshwater coaxed from the waves, every superstition whispered in the dark was a testament to the will to keep sailing forward. And as we peel back these layers of ingenuity, we uncover something even more profound: the unshakable belief that the next horizon, no matter how distant, was worth the cost. That spirit, more than any sail or star chart, was the true compass that guided them home. The ocean wasn't just water, it was a canvas for humanity's deepest fears and wildest imaginings. Ancient mariners didn't merely chart waves, they navigated a world where every shadow beneath the surface could be a monster, every unnatural wave the wrath of some forgotten god. Scandinavian sailors whispered of the kraken, its tentacles capable of dragging entire ships into the abyss, a myth likely born from encounters with giant squid that could grow longer than their longships. Mediterranean traders carried carvings of the evil eye to ward off misfortune, while Polynesian navigators avoided voyages during certain lunar phases, fearing the anger of ocean spirits. These weren't just stories, they were psychological armor against the unbearable truth that the sea was indifferent to their survival, but superstitions served a practical purpose too. The taboo against whistling on ships common from Europe to the Pacific may have stemmed from the need to listen for distant breakers in fog, avoiding bananas aboard Portuguese caravels. Likely because the fruit spoiled quickly in heat, ruining other cargo, but blame shifted to bad luck to enforce compliance. Even mermaid legends found from the Caribbean to Japan often described manatees or dugongs glimpsed at twilight, their human-like nursing habits sparking tales of seductive sea maidens luring sailors to doom. Every myth held a kernel of hard-earned wisdom disguised as fantasy. Fear forged camaraderie in unexpected ways. Norse crews shared fear-binding rituals before storms, gripping a ceremonial spear and swearing oaths to face death together. Chinese junks held nightly storytelling sessions where veteran sailors recounted narrow escapes, turning trauma into teaching moments. And when Polynesian navigators felt despair creeping in, they'd chant the names of ancestral voyagers, reminding themselves that others had survived these same waters. Shared superstitions became a language of trust. If your shipmate refused to sail on a Friday the 13th, you knew they took risks seriously. Yet for all the terror, curiosity always won. Consider Ferdinand Magellan's crew, who mutinied not from fear of sea monsters, but from fear they'd never see the horizon beyond the Atlantic. Or the Polynesians who deliberately sailed into the unknown on Waikolua, a double-hulled canoes stocked with food for one-way trips, willing to risk everything for lands they only dreamed existed. What drove them wasn't recklessness, but a conviction coded into human DNA that the answer to every mystery lies just beyond the edge of the map, the real magic of these voyages. They transformed terror into tools. Cloud shapes that once signaled angry gods became weather predictors. Whirlpools blamed on vengeful spirits were later understood as tidal currents. Even the Kraken's legend helped sailors recognize the sudden, ink-dark turbulence of squid-fleeing predators, an early warning system. Fear didn't vanish, it evolved into respect for the ocean's raw power. And that respect, paired with insatiable curiosity, became the compass that guided humanity across the endless blue. What truly set these legendary voyages apart wasn't just the destinations, it was the burning why behind them. Take Ferdinand Magellan, who staked his life on a single audacious idea, that the Spice Islands could be reached by sailing west instead of east. His obsession wasn't merely about shortcuts, it was about rewriting the rules of global trade, positioning Portugal and later Spain as masters of the maritime economy. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Chinese Admiral Zheng, he commanded treasure fleets so vast they made European caravels look like bathtub toys. But his missions weren't conquests, they were floating embassies designed to awe foreign rulers with Ming Dynasty splendor and spin a web of diplomatic alliances. The contrast is striking, one man driven by capitalist hunger, another by imperial prestige, yet both equally willing to risk everything on the roll of oceanic dice. Beneath these grand ambitions pulsed quieter, more personal motives. Consider the Polynesian families who packed entire ecosystems into their canoes, taro shoots, breadfruit saplings, even domesticated pigs, not just to explore but to belong somewhere new. Their voyages weren't about claiming territory, they were searches for Aina, a concept deeper than land, a place where people and nature could thrive in balance. Or the Viking settlers who braved North Atlantic ice not for fame, but for escape from overcrowded fjords, from kings demanding allegiance, from the suffocating grip of the known world. For them, the sea wasn't just a path, it was liberation written in waves. Societies back home played their part too. European monarchs dangled titles and monopolies to lure sailors into the unknown, while Pacific Islanders celebrated navigators as heroes in chants that spanned generations. The Taino people of the Caribbean carved ceremonial canoes to honor ancestors who'd first arrived by sea, embedding exploration into cultural DNA. Even the tools reflected these values. Arab merchants developed the camel not just as a navigational aid, but as a sacred object, its knots blessed by imams before voyages. Exploration wasn't a solo act, it was a chorus of individual courage and collective expectation. Yet for all the grand narratives, history remembers the quiet triumphs too. The anonymous Micronesian navigator who guided her canoe to a new atoll using only wave patterns. The Basque whalers who kept their fishing grounds secret for centuries by memorizing ocean swells rather than drawing maps. These unsung pioneers remind us that the drive to explore isn't reserved for kings and admirals, it's etched into the human spirit itself. And as we'll soon see, that spirit would demand more than courage. It would require tools as inventive as the dreams they served. Imagine holding a brass astrolabe, its delicate rings etched with celestial coordinates, as your ship pitches violently in the North Atlantic swell. This wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline, the difference between finding safe harbor or drifting into oblivion. The mariner's astrolabe, a stripped-down version of its more ornate land-based cousin, worked on a deceptively simple principle. By aligning its sighting mechanism with the sun or a known star, sailors could measure the angle above the horizon to determine their latitude. But here's where skill trumped technology. A seasoned navigator would wait for local noon, when the sun reached its highest point, to minimize errors caused by the ship's movement. Even then, a slight miscalibration or shaky hand could throw readings off by miles, especially in rough seas where the horizon blurred into the waves. The cross staff offered a slightly more forgiving alternative. Picture a wooden staff about 3 feet long, with a sliding crosspiece that the navigator would adjust until its top edge lined up with the sun and the bottom kissed the horizon. The angle could then be read from markings on the staff like a primitive protractor for the open ocean. But this method came with its own dangers. Staring directly at the sun to align the crosspiece often left navigators half-blind for days. Portuguese sailors coined the term "eye of the navigator" for this painful affliction, a reminder that every tool demanded its own kind of sacrifice. Then there was the backstaff, a clever 16th century innovation designed to solve the sun-gazing problem. Instead of looking toward the sun, the user stood with their back to it, casting a shadow onto the instrument's arc. By adjusting a sliding vane to align the shadow with the horizon, they could measure altitude without frying their retinas. It was like using sundial logic in reverse, a brilliant workaround that became standard on European ships. But none of these tools worked in isolation. Skilled navigators would cross-reference readings with dead reckoning, tracking speed via hand-thrown logs and direction via compass to compensate for each instrument's blind spots. The real challenge lay in interpreting these measurements under pressure. Cloud cover could obscure the stars for weeks, while magnetic anomalies near the equator made compass needles dance unpredictably. That's why Arab traders developed the camel, a handheld rectangle of wood with a knotted string. By holding one end of the string in their teeth and adjusting the board until its edges framed Polaris, they could measure latitude by counting the knots. Each knot corresponded to a specific port's latitude, turning a simple tool into a personalized roadmap. Meanwhile, Pacific Islanders achieved similar precision without instruments at all. They'd stretch their hand toward the horizon, counting finger widths between a star and the water's edge, with each finger representing about 2 degrees of arc. These instruments shared one crucial trait. They required not just knowledge but artistry. An experienced navigator could sense when wave motion skewed a measurement or when haze distorted the horizon line. They'd account for atmospheric refraction, the way Earth's atmosphere bends light, making stars appear slightly higher than they really are by subtracting a degree or two from their readings. Some kept secret notebooks of corrections, honed through decades of trial and error. This wasn't science as we know it today. It was science fused with intuition, where every calculation carried the weight of lives and cargo. Yet for all their ingenuity, these tools had limits. None could accurately determine longitude, a problem that would stump navigators until the 18th century. And in the southern hemisphere, where Polaris vanishes below the horizon, sailors had to rely on the less reliable Southern Cross constellation. The instruments themselves were fragile. Moisture warped wooden cross staffs, and salt corrosion could seize up astrolabes' moving parts. That's why the greatest navigators treated them as partners rather than infallible guides, always double-checking against wind patterns, bird behavior, and the smell of the air. The true masterpiece wasn't the tool in their hands, but the synthesis of data, experience, and raw instinct that kept their ships on course. As these technologies spread across trade routes, they sparked a quiet revolution. A Portuguese caravel captain might trade knowledge of the cross staff for Arab star charts, while a Chinese junk navigator could adapt the backstaff principle using locally crafted bamboo. Each culture refined the tools to fit their needs. Viking sun compasses used in foggy northern seas, or Polynesian star compasses memorized rather than built. This cross-pollination of ideas laid the groundwork for the next leap in maritime history. Maps that didn't just record coastlines but unlocked the secrets of the open ocean itself. Early nautical maps were less about accuracy and more about imagination, where uncharted waters teemed with leviathans and the edges of the world simply dropped off into darkness. Medieval European mappa mundi often depicted Jerusalem as the center of the earth, surrounded by concentric rings of mythical lands and monstrous creatures. Even as late as the 1500s, maps warning, "Here be dragons," weren't just decorative, they reflected genuine terror of the unknown. But somewhere between myth and measurement, a revolution began. The first breakthrough came with portolan charts hand-drawn on sheepskin or vellum. These weren't maps of land at all, but of the sea itself. Crisscrossed with rune lines radiating from compass roses, they allowed sailors to plot straight-line courses between ports by aligning a ruler with these directional webs. Though coastlines might be distorted, the angles between key harbors were precise enough to navigate by, turning guesswork into geometry. The real game-changer arrived with Claudius Ptolemy's Geographia, rediscovered by European scholars in the 14th century. His idea of a spherical Earth with latitude and longitude lines, though rudimentary, laid the foundation for scientific cartography. Suddenly, the world wasn't a flat disk but a calculable globe. Arab geographers like Al-Idrisi refined these concepts, blending Ptolemy's theories with first-hand accounts from traders who'd sailed to places like Zanzibar and Canton. Their maps, oriented with south at the top, reminded users that perspective was fluid, knowledge wasn't fixed but cumulative. Then came Gerhard Mercator in 1569, whose projection solved a nagging problem: how to represent the curved Earth on a flat sheet without distorting navigational angles. His solution, stretching the poles into exaggerated proportions, made straight lines on maps correspond to constant compass bearings, a godsend for ocean crossings. Sailors could now chart a course from Lisbon to the Caribbean without constantly adjusting for the Earth's curvature. But Mercator's brilliance had a trade-off. Greenland appeared monstrously oversized compared to Africa, a quirk that still puzzles schoolchildren today. Yet the most underrated innovation wasn't the maps themselves, but how they were shared. The Portuguese Costa da India in Lisbon became a clearinghouse for nautical intelligence, where captains debriefed scribes about currents, landmarks, and safe harbors after each voyage. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was crowdsourcing avant la lettre. A single updated chart could save countless lives, like the one that warned of hidden reefs near the Azores, based on a shipwreck survivor's sketch. Even errors had value. When a Dutch map showed California as an island in the 1600s, subsequent explorers' corrections tightened the feedback loop between discovery and documentation. The final piece of the puzzle was symbiosis. Maps needed sailors, and sailors needed maps. Polynesian wave charts carved from coconut fiber couldn't guide a Spanish galleon, just as Mediterranean portolans were useless to a Chinese junk captain. But the underlying principle united them. Knowledge, once scattered and secretive, became collaborative. A VOC captain in Amsterdam might study a stolen Portuguese map, while a Polynesian navigator added new atolls to his mental star compass. This was the true power of cartography's evolution, not just shrinking the world, but connecting it. And as these threads of knowledge wove tighter, they set the stage for the next great leap, turning navigation from an art into a science. Silent and swift communication across open water was an art form as precise as navigation itself. Picture a Phoenician merchant ship spotting a plume of smoke coiling into the sky from a distant headland, a prearranged signal warning of pirate activity ahead. Or a Ming Dynasty fleet using a complex system of lanterns and drums to coordinate hundreds of vessels in total darkness. These weren't just messages, they were lifelines strung across the waves with ingenuity and nerve. The Polynesians took it further, developing an entire language of ocean signaling, flashing reflected sunlight off polished pearl shells to convey warnings or invitations across miles of open water. A single misread signal could mean missing a life-saving freshwater atoll or sailing blindly into a typhoon's path. Flags became the alphabet of the seas. By the age of European exploration, naval codes had evolved into sophisticated systems where the position, color, and sequence of flags could relay anything from battle orders to disease outbreaks. The British Royal Navy's telegraphic signals of marine vocabulary could transmit over 200,000 messages using just 18 flags, a cryptographic marvel long before the digital age. But flags had limits. In windless conditions or fog, ships turned to sound. Mediterranean galley crews used distinct drum rhythms to coordinate oar strokes during battles, while Arctic whalers developed echoing horn blasts that carried for miles across icy silence. Then there were the feathered messengers, carrier pigeons tucked into bamboo cages aboard Arab dhows, released to fly home with news of safe arrivals or storm delays. Viking longships sometimes carried ravens, released to seek land when the crew grew desperate. The birds weren't infallible. A Pacific legend tells of a pigeon lost in a squall, leading 2 Polynesian voyaging canoes to sail in circles for weeks, but when they worked, they shrank impossible distances into hours. The stakes of miscommunication could rewrite history. In 1588, a single misinterpreted signal in the Spanish Armada's lantern chain contributed to their disastrous formation against English fireships. Contrast that with the precision of Polynesian talk stones, pebbles arranged on canoe decks to represent upcoming islands, allowing illiterate crew members to visualize the voyage ahead. Every culture developed its own solutions. Chinese junks used gongs whose tones varied with the metal's temperature to signal depth changes in murky deltas, while Venetian merchant ships employed mirror flashes to outmaneuver competitors entering crowded harbors. These systems did more than relay information, they built trust across cultures. A Maltese sailor recognizing a Genos ship's distress flags would assist regardless of nationality, bound by the unwritten codes of the sea. Pacific navigators shared wave signaling techniques during rare encounters at shared fishing grounds, weaving a web of knowledge that spanned thousands of miles. Even in conflict, certain signals became universal. The raising of a white sail or the deliberate breaking of an oar signaled surrender long before the Geneva Convention. What emerged was a shadow network, invisible but vital, the original World Wide Web, humming with smoke, feathers, and flame. And as these threads of connection grew thicker, they set the stage for something even more transformative: the sprawling trade routes that would bind continents together, carrying not just goods but ideas, religions, and revolutions across the waves. The ocean didn't just separate civilizations, it stitched them together with threads of silk, whispers of spice, and the glint of gold. Take the Maritime Silk Road, a watery counterpart to the famous overland route, where Chinese junks laden with porcelain and silk met Arab dhows carrying glass and incense in bustling ports from Malacca to Zanzibar. This wasn't just trade, it was a cultural transfusion. A single Ming dynasty vase might travel from a kiln in Jiangxi to a Venetian noble's shelf, passing through the hands of Persian merchants and Swahili middlemen, each adding layers of story to its journey. The spices that fueled these voyages weren't mere luxuries, they were revolutionaries. A pinch of black pepper from Kerala could mask the taste of spoiled meat in medieval Europe, while nutmeg from the Banda Islands became so coveted. Dutch traders swapped Manhattan for a tiny spice-laden island in 1667. But the real magic happened in the exchanges no ledger could capture. Along the spice route, Arab astrolabes made their way to Java, where local navigators adapted them to read the southern stars. In return, the secrets of monsoon winds traveled west, allowing Amani sailors to reach Guangzhou months faster. Even cuisine transformed tomatoes from the Andes found their way into Neapolitan pasta, while Southeast Asian chefs folded Indian curry techniques into their dishes. These routes were more than economic arteries. They were the world's first social network, buzzing with ideas as vibrant as the goods themselves. Yet where wealth flowed, conflict followed. The triangular trade's horrific Middle Passage carried millions of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, while Spanish galleons laden with Aztec gold became floating targets for privateers. Control of these routes dictated empires' rise and fall, like when Portugal's seizure of Hormuz in 1507 choked off Persian Gulf trade, reshaping the balance of power from Lisbon to Delhi. The ocean's bounty came at a price. The very spices that enriched Malacca also drew colonial fleets, their cannons rewriting the rules of commerce. The legacy of these routes pulses through our daily lives. That morning cup of coffee, its journey traces back to Yemeni ports where Sufi monks first brewed it to stay awake for prayers, the batik patterns on your summer shirt. They echo the textile exchanges of 17th century Java and India. Even global finance owes a debt to these watery highways. The word salary comes from the Roman practice of paying soldiers in sacks of salt, a commodity so precious it was traded ounce for ounce with gold along Saharan routes that fed into Mediterranean shipping lanes. But beneath the glitter of gold and the aroma of cinnamon lurked a shadow world, one where the line between merchant and marauder blurred. For every cargo of silk that reached its destination safely, another vanished into the holds of pirates who saw these trade routes as their hunting grounds. And that's where our voyage turns next, to the cutlasses and treachery that turned the high seas into a battleground. The ocean's highways of silk and spice also drew predators, men who saw merchant ships not as vessels of trade, but floating treasure chests waiting to be cracked open. Blackbeard's very name sent chills through Caribbean ports, his beard woven with slow-burning fuses to wreathe his face in smoke during attacks. But piracy wasn't just about theatrics, it was a ruthlessly efficient business model. The infamous Bartholomew Roberts captured over 400 ships in his career, enforcing a pirate code where crewmen voted on captains and injured sailors received compensation, a twisted democracy on the high seas. Meanwhile, Mediterranean corsairs like Barbarossa operated with state backing, their raids blurring the line between criminal enterprise and naval warfare. Naval combat evolved into a brutal chess match where every advantage mattered. Spanish galleons, though laden with silver, were sitting ducks for speedy English privateer ships like those of Francis Drake, their lower profiles allowing them to outmaneuver and outgun the towering Spanish vessels. The key lay in broadside tactics, lining up parallel to an enemy ship and unleashing a synchronized volley of cannon fire aimed at the hull. A single well-placed shot could turn a gun deck into a slaughterhouse of splintered wood and flying shrapnel. But boarding actions remain the most visceral showdowns, cutlasses clashing on blood-slicked decks, grappling hooks yanking ships together like angry lovers. The Dutch even perfected a technique called hellburners, loading fireships with explosives and steering them into enemy fleets at night. Yet within this chaos emerged unexpected alliances. Pirate havens like Nassau became melting pots where runaway slaves, disgraced nobles, and deserting sailors formed makeshift societies with their own laws. The Chinese pirate Queen Qing Shi commanded a fleet larger than most navies, negotiating pardons that let her retire wealthy. Even sworn enemies sometimes cooperated. British and Spanish ships occasionally joined forces to hunt down pirates threatening their shared trade routes. The sea, for all its violence, had a way of rewriting loyalties when survival was at stake. Beyond the cutthroat glamour, these conflicts birthed systems we still rely on today. Prize courts determined the legitimacy of captured ships, laying groundwork for maritime law. The very concept of territorial waters stems from 16th century battles over who controlled coastlines. And those Jolly Roger flags, their skull and crossbones designs weren't just threats, they were psychological warfare, signaling no quarter given. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the realization that no single power could dominate the oceans indefinitely. The tides always turned, empires rose and fell, and the next horizon remained open for whoever dared to sail beyond the rules. Ships became floating universities where knowledge crossed borders as effortlessly as the waves beneath their hulls. Buddhist monks hitching rides on merchant vessels carried palm leaf scriptures from India to Sumatra, transforming temple architecture across Southeast Asia. Compare the stupas of Borobudur in Java with their ancestors at Sanchai in India, and you'll see sacred geometry migrating across oceans. Agricultural revolutions bloomed from these exchanges. African farmers adopted Southeast Asian bananas, while Chinese citrus groves sprouted from Middle Eastern saplings. Even something as simple as the lateen sail, triangular and versatile, hopped from Arab dhows to Portuguese caravels, enabling Europe's age of exploration. The ocean didn't just move goods, it wove civilizations together thread by thread. Among these exchanges, some of the quietest travelers made the loudest impact. Paper-making techniques smuggled out of China via Korean monks reached Baghdad by sea, fueling the Islamic Golden Age's literary explosion. Musical instruments like the Persian oud morphed into the European lute aboard ships crossing the Mediterranean, their melodies blending like the spices in their holds. Perhaps most remarkably, the concept of zero born in India sailed west on Arab trading vessels, revolutionizing mathematics from Cairo to Cordoba. These weren't just transfers of objects, they were sparks that ignited new ways of thinking, proving that the most dangerous thing a ship could carry wasn't weapons but ideas. Yet history's spotlight often overlooks half the passengers who shaped these voyages. Women weren't just spectators to maritime history, they helped write it. Norse sagas tell of Freydis Eiríksdóttir, who grabbed a sword from a fallen comrade to scare off Skraelinga warriors in Vinland, her pregnant belly bared as a battle cry. In Ming China, traders' wives in Quanzhou managed sprawling merchant networks from shore, their ledgers tracking monsoon schedules as precisely as any captain's log. Polynesian wayfinding traditions credit female navigators like Hina, who interpreted star paths and swell patterns with legendary precision. Even aboard pirate ships, women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read wielded cutlasses alongside men, their names struck from official records but etched into sailors' ballads. These women defied convention in ways both spectacular and subtle. A 12th century Arabic manuscript describes female pearl divers in the Persian Gulf who could hold their breath longer than any man. Their knowledge of oyster beds passed mother to daughter. On European whaling ships, captains' wives sometimes joined Arctic voyages, their diaries preserving details of indigenous hunting techniques that male crews overlooked. The real surprise isn't that women sailed, it's how thoroughly their contributions were later erased from mainstream narratives. From the Malay female traders who dominated spice negotiations to the West African fishmongers whose canoe-building techniques influenced Caribbean boat rides, their legacy lingers in the unbroken rhythms of coastal life worldwide. The sea demanded every hand on deck, regardless of gender. When storms hit, survival mattered more than stereotypes, a lesson written in the salt-stained logs of countless ships. What emerges from these fragments isn't just a corrected historical record, but a richer tapestry of human ingenuity. The next chapter of maritime history begins where these threads converge, in the bustling, chaotic, and unexpectedly cosmopolitan world of the ancient sailors' most cherished sanctuary, the port. The wooden decks of History Creek with forgotten footsteps, not just the heavy boots of male explorers, but the determined strides of women who defied oceans and expectations alike. Take Queen Tuta of Illyria in the 3rd century before the Common Era, whose pirate fleet dominated the Adriatic so fiercely that Rome dispatched entire legions to stop her. She wasn't some anomaly, she was part of an unbroken lineage of women who turned the sea into their stage. Centuries later, Arab navigator Haram bint Milhan guided fleets across the Mediterranean, her knowledge of stars and currents rivaling any man. These women didn't just accompany voyages, they commanded them, proving the ocean didn't discriminate against those who knew its rhythms. Then there were the women who sailed in disguise, their stories peeling back layers of maritime myth. Anne Bonny and Mary Read didn't just play at piracy, they fought alongside Blackbeard's crew, their swords as sharp as their wits, but their fame obscures quieter, equally remarkable figures. Like the unnamed Breton fisherwomen who worked the Grand Banks in the 1600s, their hands calloused from hauling nets in icy waters, or the Japanese pearl divers of Oma, holding their breath for minutes to harvest oysters while male scribes wrote them out of history. Even naval records occasionally slip, like the British sailor William Brown, revealed to be a woman who'd served for years undetected, her identity only uncovered after a tavern brawl in 1815. Behind the scenes, women shaped maritime destiny in ways seldom recorded. In Senegalese fishing villages, grandmothers passed down lunar tide charts to grandchildren, their memories more accurate than early European almanacs. Ming Dynasty shipyards employed female mathematicians to calculate hull stresses, their abacus beads clicking late into the night. And let's not forget the merchant wives of Venice and Alexandria, whose letters crisscrossed the Mediterranean with intelligence on pirate movements and market prices, networks so reliable that kings relied on them. The sea demanded every kind of strength, and women supplied it in spades, whether through brute force or brilliant strategy. Their legacy ripples through modern maritime culture, though you have to know where to look. The figureheads adorning old ships, many were carved in the likenesses of captains' wives or goddesses, a silent nod to feminine protection on treacherous waters. Even today, the tradition persists. The Japanese practice of funadama places dolls in ship hulls to represent guardian spirits, almost always female. From Polynesian navigation chants composed by women to the Celtic Selkie myths warning sailors to respect the ocean's feminine power, the truth is clear: the sea was never just a man's world. It was a shared frontier where courage and skill, not gender, determined who survived the storm. This hidden history does more than correct the record. It rewires our understanding of exploration itself. Because when we picture those legendary voyages now, we must see the full crew. The women plotting courses by starlight, the divers reading reefs like maps, the leaders who knew the sea's favor had nothing to do with the body you sailed in. And as we chart a course toward the next chapter, their stories remind us that the greatest navigational tool of all wasn't a compass or a sextant. It was the willingness to see beyond the horizon of convention. Now, let's turn to the indigenous knowledge that mapped the world long before European empires claimed the feat. Knowledge carried not in parchment scrolls, but in songs, stories, and the very shape of the waves. Indigenous navigators didn't just sail the ocean, they spoke its language. Picture a Polynesian wayfinder crouched in the hull of his outrigger canoe, eyes closed, feeling the subtle shifts in wave patterns through the vessel's vibrations. To him, the ocean wasn't a featureless expanse but a living map where every swell and ripple told a story. The Inuit, too, read the ice like a book, knowing that certain shades of blue in a glacier hinted at safe passage, while the presence of seals or seabirds signaled nearby Polynesian, those rare open water havens in a frozen world. These weren't just survival skills, they were sacred sciences, honed over millennia and guarded as fiercely as any royal treasure. What set these traditions apart was their sheer precision. Pacific Islanders could detect an island over the horizon by observing how waves refract around land long before modern radar could spot it. They memorized the flight paths of migratory birds like the golden plover, which never flies more than 40 miles without resting, turning birds into living compasses. The Maori of New Zealand developed Wananga, sacred schools of navigation where students spent years learning star paths, each constellation tied to specific fishing grounds or migration routes. Meanwhile, the Yolngu people of Australia navigated by the saltwater highways of their ancestors, following song lines that mapped the coast in intricate detail, every bay and headland encoded in verse. This knowledge wasn't written in logbooks but woven into the fabric of daily life. Inuit elders taught children to recognize kamanik, the direction of prevailing winds, by how snowdrift sculpted around rocks. Polynesian navigators used cape, huwetu star compasses etched not in wood but in memory with over 200 celestial markers. The Marshall Islanders took it further, crafting matang stick charts from palm ribs and shells that didn't depict islands at all but rather the interference patterns of ocean swells. To outsiders, these looked like abstract art, but to initiates, they were blueprints of the sea's hidden architecture. The spiritual dimension ran deep. Before setting sail, Maori Tohunga priests would perform karakia, invoking the gods to calm the waters and guide the waka canoe. Inuit shamans consulted Tuangate spirit helpers to predict ice conditions, while Polynesian navigators saw themselves as part of a cosmic covenant. The stars their ancestors, the ocean their kin. This wasn't superstition, it was a worldview where navigation blurred into communion. A Hawaiian wayfinder didn't just use the stars, he spoke to them, tracing his lineage back to Hokulea, the star of gladness, as if the heavens were his family tree. Modern science is only now catching up to this wisdom. NASA has studied Polynesian star path techniques for astronaut training in celestial navigation. Oceanographers use Inuit ice classifications to track Arctic thaw rates. Even the U.S. Coast Guard teaches recruits Marshallese swell pattern reading as a backup to GPS. The irony is bittersweet systems once dismissed as primitive are now recognized as masterclasses in ecological literacy. They remind us that true exploration isn't about conquering nature, but listening to it. As we turn to the role of faith at sea, consider this. When European sailors clutched crucifixes during storms, they weren't so different from the Polynesians chanting to Tangaroa, god of the ocean. Both sought comfort in the divine, but indigenous navigators went further, weaving spirituality into the very act of wayfinding. Their compasses didn't just point north, they connected earth to sky, human to horizon, in a sacred dialogue older than recorded time. On storm-tossed decks and in whispering ship chapels, faith was the unseen crew member no sailor would dare leave behind. Picture a Spanish galleon battling Atlantic squalls, its crew clinging to a tiny wooden statue of the Virgin Mary believed to possess the power to calm waves through her mere presence. Or Viking longships adorned with Thor's hammer talismans, swung from prows before raids to invoke the thunder god's favor. These weren't just rituals, they were psychological lifelines in a world where the sea's whims could mean life or death. Every major seafaring culture developed its own celestial insurance policy. Mediterranean traders sacrificed goats to Poseidon before launching. Polynesian navigators offered kava root to Tangaroa, and Arab Dhows proverbs praised Allah's mercy louder than any storm's roar. The blending of faith and navigation reached astonishing complexity. Portuguese caravels carried volto do mar charts, maps that marked not just coastlines but sacred sites where sailors should pray to avoid mythical whirlpools. Japanese fishermen still honor Abisu, the grinning god of fishermen, with tiny shrines on docks where fresh catches are laid as offerings. Even the stars became divine. Polynesian navigators saw the Pleiades cluster as the eyes of ancestors guiding canoes, while Norse sailors interpreted the aurora borealis as the armor of Valkyries lighting their path. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a framework for making sense of the incomprehensible, turning random squalls into tests of virtue and favorable winds into divine endorsements. Temples grew where terror met gratitude. The cliffside Torre de Hercules lighthouse in Spain doubled as a shrine to Neptune, where Roman sailors left votive ships carved from whalebone. In Vietnam's Hon Chong Harbor, fishermen still burn joss sticks at whale skeleton shrines, honoring the marine giants believed to push shipwrecked sailors ashore. The most revealing might be Greece's Temple of the Great Gods on Samothrace. Its initiation rites promised safe passage to initiates, a spiritual GPS for ancient mariners. These sites weren't just places of worship, they were networked sanctuaries, a divine safety net stretching across hostile waters, omens wove through daily life at sea like rigging through mast. An albatross circling a ship could be seen as a soul of a dead sailor in England, but as a storm harbinger in Polynesia. Breaking a mirror aboard guaranteed 7 years bad luck unless you threw salt over your shoulder immediately. Some beliefs had shockingly practical roots. The taboo against bananas on ships likely began because the fruit emitted ethylene gas, spoiling other cargo, but blame shifted to bad luck to enforce compliance. Even ship design bowed to superstition. Figureheads weren't just decoration. They were believed to literally ward off evil spirits, their eyes often inlaid with silver to see dangers ahead. This spiritual toolkit served two vital functions. It steadied nerves in the face of mortal danger, and it encoded practical knowledge in memorable myths. Pacific taboos about fishing during certain moon phases preserved fish stocks, just as Mediterranean saints' feast days often aligned with optimal sailing seasons. When science failed, when stars vanished behind storm clouds or compasses spun wildly near the equator, faith offered a fallback system. A Norse skipper might not understand magnetic declination, but if his Thor's hammer amulet had brought him home safely before, why risk leaving it ashore? Yet the sea gods demanded more than reverence, they required adaptation. The same Polynesian navigators who chanted to Tangaroa also meticulously tracked wave refraction. Arab sailors praising Allah's mercy simultaneously perfected the astrolabe. This duality reveals the ancient mariner's true genius, the ability to hold both celestial calculations and celestial faith in mind without contradiction. Tomorrow's storm might be a test from God, but that didn't mean you shouldn't reef the sails. As we turn from divine protection to nature's fury, remember this: every prayer whispered into salt-sprayed winds was also a promise to learn, to adapt, to respect the boundaries set by wind and wave. Because the ocean spared no one, not even the faithful, from its greatest trials, the environmental gauntlets that made or broken empires. The ocean's wrath could turn from whisper to roar in moments, swallowing even the mightiest vessels like toys. Take the Swedish warship Vasa, a marvel of naval engineering, adorned with intricate carvings and boasting 64 guns. Yet on its maiden voyage in 1628, a gust of wind caught its towering sails, sending water rushing through open gun ports. Within minutes, the ship lay at the bottom of Stockholm's harbor, taking dozens of lives with it. The tragedy wasn't just bad luck, it was a preventable disaster born from design flaws ignored in the rush to impress. Centuries later, divers would find the ship nearly intact, preserved by the Baltic's cold waters, a ghostly monument to hubris frozen in time. Then there was the Batavia, a Dutch East India Company ship wrecked off Australia's coast in 1629. What followed was worse than the storm itself, a mutiny where survivors turned on each other in a spiral of violence and madness. The ship's commander, Francisco Pelsaert, took a longboat to seek help, returning months later to find a blood-stained dictatorship under the butcher Jeronimus Cornelis. Only a handful of the original 300 survived, their tale etched into history as one of the sea's darkest chapters. These weren't just bad voyages, They were pressure chambers that revealed what happens when civilization's thin veneer meets the terror of isolation. Yet amid the chaos, glimmers of ingenuity shone. When the Essex, a whaling ship, was rammed and sunk by a sperm whale in 1820, its crew drifted for months in open boats. Starvation drove them to unthinkable measures, yet their survival hinged on tiny acts of brilliance, using whale oil to seal leaks or catching rainwater with salvaged canvas. Similarly, Inuit hunters stranded on ice floes would carve makeshift hooks from bone to fish through cracks, while Polynesian castaways sustained themselves by decoding the ocean's rhythm, knowing certain fish gathered under floating debris. Survival wasn't just about strength, it was about reading the environment like a language. The sea's lessons were written in salt and sacrifice. Spanish galleons, overloaded with Aztec gold, often sank in Caribbean hurricanes because their captains ignored indigenous warnings about storm seasons. Contrast that with the savvy of Malay pearl divers who could predict squalls by watching how dolphins dove beneath waves. Every disaster carried a warning, every near miss a lesson, if sailors were willing to listen. And from these hard-earned truths, new technologies emerged. Lifeboats evolved from flimsy rafts to sealed, self-righting vessels after the Titanic disaster. Storm prediction improved when meteorologists finally heeded age-old indigenous knowledge about cloud formations and animal behavior. What lingers from these stories isn't just the horror, it's the resilience. When the Karluk was crushed in Arctic ice in 1913, anthropologist Vilhjalmur Stefansson's team survived by adapting Inuit techniques, building igloos and hunting seals with handmade tools. Their journals reveal a startling truth. Those who embraced local wisdom lived, while those clinging to European methods often perished. The sea didn't care about tradition, it demanded adaptability. Now, as modern sonar maps every trench and satellites track global weather, it's easy to forget how recently these dangers ruled supreme. Yet every time a hurricane diverts a cruise ship or a rogue wave rattles an oil rig, we're reminded that the ocean's power remains untamed. The difference today isn't just technology, it's the collective memory of those who faced the abyss before us, turning their tragedies into our textbooks. And as we chart a course toward the future, their legacy whispers the same timeless warning: respect the waters or be swallowed by them. The ocean hasn't changed, but the way we navigate it has transformed beyond recognition. Where ancient Polynesians once relied on star compasses etched in memory, modern sailors tap glowing screens that triangulate their position with satellites orbiting 12,000 miles overhead. GPS coordinates update in real time, accurate to within a few feet, a far cry from the Viking sunstones that could only hint at the sun's position through dense fog. Yet here's the paradox: the very technology that made celestial navigation obsolete hasn't erased it. The U.S. Navy still trains officers to use sextants, those elegant brass instruments that measure the angle between horizon and stars. Why? Because cyber attacks can jam GPS signals, solar flares disrupt electronics, and batteries die. When your digital lifeline fails, the same sky that guided Magellan becomes your fallback. Radar and sonar have likewise revolutionized how we see the unseen. A Polynesian navigator detecting land by wave refraction might take hours to confirm suspicions. Modern depth sounders and Doppler radar map the seabed and approaching storms in seconds. But traditionalists point out a hidden cost: over-reliance on tech erodes instinct. Norwegian mariners recount stories of radar-glued skippers plowing into reefs their grandfathers would have sensed from the smell of the water. That's why elite sailing schools from Maine to New Zealand teach blind navigation, forcing students to rely solely on wind, currents, and the stars for days at a time. The goal isn't nostalgia, it's building a mental backup drive. The real magic happens where old and new converge. Take the Hokulea, a reconstructed Polynesian voyaging canoe that circumnavigated the globe using traditional wayfinding but with a twist. While the crew followed star paths and bird migrations by night, by day they cross-checked their position with solar panels powering a single GPS unit, sealed in a waterproof case for emergencies. This hybrid approach honors ancestral wisdom while acknowledging modern realities. Similarly, the ocean race competitors strap cutting-edge weather modeling software onto carbon fiber yachts, yet still watch for the same cloud formations that told Cook and Bligh impending squalls. Even space-age tech carries echoes of the past. Satellite-based automatic identification systems eyes now show every ship's position on digital charts, preventing collisions. A high-tech version of the smoke signals and flag codes ancient traders used to announce their arrival. And those GPS satellites, their atomic clocks must account for Einstein's theory of relativity, just as medieval Arab astronomers adjusted star charts for atmospheric refraction. The tools have changed, but the dance between precision and adaptation remains unchanged. What endures most powerfully isn't just the techniques, but the mindset. The same curiosity that drove Phoenicians to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules now fuels engineers designing autonomous drone ships. When modern explorers like Sylvia Earle mapped the ocean's twilight zone with submersibles, they channeled the same spirit as those first Pacific Islanders who paddled into the unknown. The difference is scale. Where a Viking longship might carry 40 souls, today's icebreakers host entire scientific cities drifting across the Arctic. Yet the essential question remains: what lies beyond the next wave? This continuum between past and future becomes vividly personal when you step onto a ship like the HMS Victory in Portsmouth, where Nelson's original sextants sit glass-cased beside interactive holograms explaining their use. Or when you meet a Marshall Islander who can still chant ancestral swell patterns while checking Google Earth on her smartphone. The thread connecting these moments is humanity's unbroken conversation with the sea, a dialogue that began with whisper-thin outriggers and now spans satellite constellations. And as we'll soon see, that conversation is far from over. Courage at sea wasn't just about facing storms, it meant sailing toward horizons where maps ended and legend began. Consider the moment Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, his crew mutinous from months of battling ferocious currents. When his officers begged him to turn back, Dias ordered the sails tightened and pressed forward into the roaring unknown. That single decision didn't just open a new trade route, it rewrote humanity's understanding of the possible. Fast forward 5 centuries and you'll find the same spirit in SpaceX engineers cheering as a rocket sticks its landing. Another horizon breached, another impossible conquered. The tools have changed, but the heartbeat of exploration remains identical. That fleeting instant when doubt gives way to discovery. Adaptability separated survivors from shipwrecks. When the Polynesian voyager Hokulea's crew lost sight of stars for weeks during their 1976 voyage to Tahiti, navigator Mau Piailug didn't panic. He switched to reading ocean swells like Braille, feeling their direction through the canoe's hull until the skies cleared. Compare that to Apollo 13's engineers MacGyvering a carbon dioxide filter from duct tape and spare parts, a crisis solved not by textbooks but by creative improvisation. Modern entrepreneurs know this dance well. Startups pivot their entire business models overnight, just as Magellan's fleet abandoned doomed ships in Patagonia to lighten their load for the Pacific crossing. The lesson echoes across time. Rigidity sinks ships, while flexibility builds bridges to new worlds. Resilience was forged in the crucible of deprivation. Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic crew survived 2 years stranded on ice not through strength alone, but by cultivating what psychologists now call psychological capital, the ability to find purpose in suffering. His men performed Shakespeare on the ice to sustain morale, mirroring how Polynesian navigators chanted genealogies to remember why they sailed. Astronauts on the International Space Station face similar mental battles, their carefully scheduled upward spirals of positive routines, exercise, music, Earth-gazing direct descendants of Viking longships storytelling traditions during endless northern nights. The common thread, hope isn't a passive wish, it's a discipline honed through deliberate practice. Teamwork transformed individuals into crews capable of miracles. Zhenghe's treasure fleets, comprising hundreds of ships with specialized roles from horse transports to freshwater tankers, operated like a precision clockwork, their success reliant on each sailor knowing their part. That intricate coordination mirrors today's Mars rover missions, where engineers across continents synchronize their efforts to guide a robot millions of miles away. Even Silicon Valley's agile development sprints owe a debt to Age of Sail watch systems, where sailors rotated through 4-hour shifts to maintain relentless forward motion. The genius lies in structure. Clear roles, swift communication, and shared stakes turn chaotic groups into forces that reshape geography. What binds these eras together is an unshakable truth: exploration is never solitary. The Polynesians' star paths weren't just navigation tools, they were communal knowledge passed down through chants that every villager memorized. Similarly, NASA open-source research and startup incubators prove that breakthroughs flourish when minds interconnect. The greatest legacy of history's seafarers isn't the lands they found, but the collaborative ethos they modeled, one that turns the terrifying unknown into a puzzle waiting to be solved together. So the next time you face your own uncharted waters, whether launching a business, mastering a skill, or simply navigating life's storms, remember you're part of an ancient lineage. The same qualities that steered wooden ships through typhoons now power satellites through asteroid belts. Curiosity remains our compass, perseverance our anchor, and resilience the wind in our sails. Because the world's edges aren't in points, they're invitations to begin again, wiser than before. The ripple effects of ancient voyages extend far beyond maps and trade routes. They rewrote the very fabric of life on Earth. When Columbus's ships first made landfall in the Caribbean, they unknowingly set in motion the Columbian Exchange, a biological and cultural revolution that would dwarf the ambitions of any empire. Imagine Italian kitchens without tomatoes, Thai curries without chili peppers, or Irish fields without potatoes, all foods that crossed oceans aboard wooden ships. But this transfer wasn't just about crops. European horses transformed plains' indigenous cultures in North America, while Afro-Caribbean rhythms blended with Spanish guitars to birth entirely new musical genres. The Earth itself became a grand mosaic, with every voyage adding another piece. Languages, too, sailed on these currents. Portuguese traders in Japan left behind loanwords like pan for bread, while Malay terms like amok and orangutan seeped into English through colonial encounters. The Creole dialects of the Caribbean still carry the cadence of West African grammar mixed with French and Spanish vocabulary, linguistic fossils of the slave trade's brutal routes. Even gestures traveled. The Polynesian haka war chant found echoes in Maori performances, while Mediterranean hand signals for bargaining spread to ports worldwide. Communication was no longer bound by geography. It became as fluid as the tides. Trade networks didn't just move goods, they rewired economies. The silver mines of Potosi in Bolivia funded Ming Dynasty tax reforms, thanks to Spanish galleons hauling bullion across the Pacific. Venetian glassmakers guarded their techniques like state secrets, only to see them smuggled to Istanbul and eventually Amsterdam by enterprising sailors. The Dutch tulip mania of the 1600s, a speculative frenzy over bulbs imported from Ottoman lands, revealed how deeply maritime trade could destabilize entire financial systems. Suddenly, a shipwreck off Java could trigger bankruptcy in Antwerp. Yet the most startling changes were ecological. Rats stowed away on ships' annihilated ground, nesting birds in the Galapagos, while Eurasian diseases carried unwittingly by explorers wiped out up to 90% of some indigenous populations. In reverse, syphilis may have sailed from the Americas to Europe, leaving its mark on Renaissance art in the gaunt faces of plague victims. Ecosystems collided with the violence of continental drift, leaving extinctions and new hybrids in their wake. The world didn't just shrink, it became entangled. A single Manila galleon might carry Chinese silk to Mexico, where it was traded for silver that funded Spanish wars in Flanders, all while its crew swapped Malay love songs with Acapulco dockworkers. This wasn't globalization, it was something wilder, messier, and more alive. The ocean became a synapse firing impulses between civilizations, each voyage sparking revolutions in art, warfare, and even thought. Some legacies are written in stone, others are written in sugarcane fields, in the melodies of blues music, or in the DNA of modern tomatoes. The true measure of these explorers lies not in the miles they logged, but in the invisible threads they wove between continents, threads that still pull tight today. And as we untangle these connections, we uncover mysteries even deeper than the ocean's trenches. Even with centuries of seafaring knowledge, the ocean still guards its secrets fiercely, none more haunting than the mystery of the Mary Celeste. Found adrift near the Azores in 1872 with its cargo intact and not a soul aboard, this ghost ship became the stuff of maritime legend. The crew's personal belongings lay untouched, a half-eaten meal still on the table, as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. No storm damage, no signs of mutiny, just an eerie silence that sparked theories from pirate attacks to sea monster encounters. Modern forensic analyzers suggest a mundane explanation. A faulty alcohol cargo tank might have leaked fumes, causing the crew to abandon ship in panic. But the truth remains as elusive as the tides that carried the Celeste to its fate. Then there's the tantalizing possibility that Admiral Zheng, his mammoth treasure fleets, reached the Americas decades before Columbus. Ming Dynasty records describe voyages to the ends of the earth, and some scholars point to pre-Columbian Chinese artifacts found along Pacific coasts from jade carvings in Mexico to chicken bones in Chile as potential evidence. Could massive Chinese junks have ridden the Kuroshio current across the Pacific? The idea challenges Eurocentric narratives of discovery, but without a smoking gun like a sunken wreck bearing Ming porcelain, it lingers in the realm of captivating speculation. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're reminders of how much we still don't know. Take the SS Waratah, a luxury liner dubbed Australia's Titanic, which vanished off Durban in 1909 with 200 passengers. Search expeditions have found nothing, not even a chair or a lifebelt. Or the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner discovered run aground in the graveyard of the Atlantic in 1921, its crew missing and its navigational equipment eerily sabotaged. Even in our age of satellites and sonar, the sea swallows stories whole. What makes these mysteries endure isn't just the lack of answers, it's how they echo the courage and peril of exploration itself. Every vanished ship whispers the same question: how far would you go into the unknown? Today, we honor those explorers not by closing the book on their stories, but by keeping the pages open. Museums from Lisbon to Yokohama preserve their vessels as touchstones to the past, while oceanographers use cutting-edge tech to scan the seabed for clues. Citizen historians pore over yellowed logs, and filmmakers reimagine their journeys, ensuring these tales aren't fossilized but live on as invitations to wonder, to investigate, to set sail toward the next horizon of understanding. The greatest tribute we can offer isn't just solving their puzzles, but embracing the spirit that drove them, the willingness to venture beyond the map's edge, knowing some mysteries might never be unraveled. Because sometimes the search itself is the destination. From the weathered planks of 1,000-year-old Viking longships to the star charts etched into Polynesian oral histories, preserving maritime heritage isn't just about looking backward, it's keeping alive conversations with the sea that began millennia ago. Walk through Oslo's Viking ship museum, where the Oseberg ship's serpentine prow still seems ready to slice through fjord mists, and you're not just seeing a relic under glass. You're witnessing the payoff of an extraordinary rescue mission. Farmers discovering this burial ship in 1904, archaeologists painstakingly reassembling thousands of fragments, and modern conservators battling fungal decay with space-age climate control. But the real magic happens outside museum walls, where groups like the Polynesian Voyaging Society don't just study history, they breathe it back to life. Their double-hulled canoe Hocula isn't a static display. It's a classroom without walls, having sailed over 200,000 miles using only traditional wayfinding techniques, training a new generation to read waves like their ancestors did. This revival isn't nostalgia, it's urgent cultural triage. When Hawaiian navigator Nainoa Thompson apprenticed under Micronesian master Mau Piailug in the 1970s, he was racing against time. Piailug came from Satawal, one of the last islands where star path navigation hadn't been eroded by GPS dependency. Their voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments didn't just prove ancient methods worked, it sparked a Pacific-wide renaissance. Today, kids in Honolulu learn star compasses alongside algebra, while Marshallese elders teach wave pattern mapping using smartphone apps that overlay traditional stick charts onto satellite images. It's a bridge between eras, proving tradition isn't about freezing the past but carrying its wisdom forward. The craftsmanship behind these preservations borders on time travel. In Denmark's Roskilde shipyard, archaeologists and boat builders work side by side, using replica Viking tools to reconstruct warships plank by plank. They discovered oak needs to be split along the grain, not sawn, to match the flexibility of original longships, a technique lost for centuries. Similarly, Mystic Seaport shipwrights maintain the Charles W. Morgan, the last wooden whaling ship afloat, using 19th-century blacksmith forges to shape replacement fittings. The devil's in the details. Chinese shipbuilders restoring Ming Dynasty treasure ship replicas found traditional tongue oil caulking repels barnacles better than modern synthetics, while Portuguese fishers still weave nets with knots documented in 15th century Portolan manuals. Digital technology now amplifies these efforts. The Mary Rose Trust employs 3D modeling to simulate Tudor ship stresses, while Australian researchers use spectral imaging to recover faded ink on Cook's Endeavour logs. But some secrets resist high-tech solutions, like the exact composition of Greek fire, Byzantium's legendary naval flamethrower. Reenactors at the Hellenic Maritime Museum have come closer by studying Venetian accounts hinting at quicklime and naphtha mixtures, their experiments producing eerie green flames that dance on water. Perhaps most moving are the living traditions that never needed revival, like the annual turtle calling ceremonies of the Torres Strait Islanders, where songs passed down 12 generations still guide sea creatures to hunters. Or the Norwegian clinker boat builders keeping the old ways alive, not for tourists, but because their grandfathers taught them cedar steamed over juniper fires bends truer than fiberglass. These aren't performances, they're continuations. What binds these efforts from glass-encased museum ships to teenagers navigating by hand-held camel is the understanding that maritime heritage isn't a collection of artifacts. It's the accumulated genius of countless souls who stared down the horizon and dared to go farther. Their legacy lives every time a child traces Polynesian constellation names in a planetarium, or when a historian deciphers a ship's log and realizes Columbus's crew recorded the first written account of a hurricane. The sea remembers even when we forget, and through these acts of preservation, we reclaim our place in that unbroken chain. The waves that carried these legendary seafarers still lap against our shores today, whispering their timeless lessons across the centuries. What makes their stories endure isn't just the miles they charted, it's the raw humanity behind each voyage. Picture a Viking navigator squinting through a sunstone in howling winds, or a Polynesian wayfinder singing star paths to stay awake during a 30-day crossing. These weren't superhuman feats, they were triumphs of ordinary people who refused to accept limits. That same spark lives in anyone who's ever stared down a challenge and thought, what if I tried anyway? Whether you're launching a startup, learning a skill, or navigating personal storms, you're sailing in their wake. Their greatest gift wasn't just new trade routes, it was a blueprint for facing the unknown. Think of Zheng He's treasure fleet, where shipwrights solved the problem of hull stress by observing how bamboo bends without breaking, or the Arctic whalers who survived ice flow disasters by adopting Inuit techniques overnight. Innovation wasn't a luxury, it was survival. That lesson rings just as true today when entrepreneurs pivot business models or scientists collaborate across borders. They're channeling the same adaptive spirit that once kept ships afloat in typhoons. The tools have changed, but the playbook remains. Observe closely, adapt quickly, and respect the wisdom of those who have navigated similar waters before you. What's astonishing is how these explorers transformed fear into fuel. The Phoenicians who sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules didn't do so because they lacked imagination. They did it despite vivid visions of sea monsters and edge-of-the-world waterfalls. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that curiosity matters more. Modern explorers echo this daily, from astronauts signing up for one-way Mars missions to journalists venturing into war zones. The common thread, a vision so compelling it overrides the instinct to stay safe. That's the real treasure these seafarers left us, not gold or spices, but proof that humans thrive when reaching toward something greater than themselves. So as you close this chapter, remember, you don't need a wooden ship or a star compass to embark on your own voyage. Every time you push past self-doubt, every time you collaborate with unlikely allies, every time you find your way when maps fail, you're honoring their legacy. The ocean they crossed was never just water. It was the space between I can't and I will, and that's a frontier that never closes. If these stories resonated with you, pay it forward, tap that like button to help others discover this hidden history. Got a personal voyage you're navigating? Drop it in the comments. This channel thrives on shared adventures. And if you're hungry for more mysteries of the past, hit subscribe. We're always charting new topics. Until our next exploration, keep your compass set to curiosity. The horizon's waiting.